Thanks very much for coming to my talk. It's really a great opportunity for me to share my research, actually my ongoing research and my thoughts, actually my recent thoughts on a comparison between the sentence final emojis and sentence final particles, which I'm trying to approach from a syntax pragmatics interface perspective. Okay. And since my talk is on emoji, I kind of did a user-based perspective first. So when I was trying to prepare for this talk, I actually looked into my own social media accounts in both English and in Chinese. So I have a Twitter account. You can follow me if you want. And then I also have a Weibo account, which is the Chinese equivalent of Twitter. And when I looked into my profiles in both platforms, I realized that I used multiple emojis in my most recent post in basically everywhere. So in my most recent tweet, I actually complained about my own habit of unfortunate procrastination. And so I used this emoji, the smile while smiling while crying, and then the face palm emoji and this melting emoji together. And on the Weibo platform, I used these three emojis in a row when I complained about some recent paparazzi reports. Interestingly, I can no longer tell or remember what exactly I was feeling when I was posting these tweets and Weibo posts, but it is clear that the emotions conveyed by these and other emojis are actually highly subtle. And it is no doubt that emojis have become an increasingly important part of our everyday life. Hence my research topic and my interest in this area. Okay. And before going into the further details, I want to clarify that there are actually two major uses of emojis, which I respectively call the affective and the non-affective usage. There are alternative terms for these two different uses as well. For example, some people call them use conventional versus truth conventional. And there are also others who call them non-at issue versus at issue uses. But here in this study and this talk, I will use these two terms and I will focus on the affective use of emoji and leave the non-affective use aside. To illustrate what I mean by affective versus non-affective usage of the emoji symbols, I gave these two examples. So in the sentence in 1A, which says great idea, thumb up, I'm in, a happy face, the two emojis here are used in an affective way, which means they add in the further emotions, say the speaker affects or attitudes to the text. Whereas in 1B, when someone posts a line like, if I were in Detroit, I'd give you a, and then this is a gift emoji. This is what is called a non-affective usage of the emoji because it can be directly translated into an English word like gift. If we look into more linguistic constructions, we can see that it is the non-affective use of emojis that can readily participate in various interesting linguistic operations. Say, for example, in this negation context, when someone says, I'd give you a gift emoji, then it is fine to reply saying that, no, you won't, which is denying the content of the emoji. By comparison, when someone says, I'm in, with a happy face, it is not so good. Actually, it's pretty odd to answer, no, you aren't happy, because then you're denying the content of the emoji. And this clearly shows us that the affective use of emoji is not really an at issue or truth conditional usage, but only as in further speaker attitude or mood. Okay, so that's my focus in this research. All right. And clearly, emojis are not the only means in which human beings can communicate and convey emotions, because long before the advent of CMC, the computer-mediated communication era, many languages had long used various tools or lexical items to convey emotions, speaker attitudes. For example, in Chinese, more exactly in Mandarin Chinese, there are different ways to combine a sentence with a sentence final particle or an affective particle to convey the different tones. So into A, it says it's snowing, but the final particle yeah is giving this sentence a very happy tone. Sounds as if they were saying, wow, I'm so excited that it's snowing now. Whereas if you change this sentence final particle to a different one, let's say, as in this, into B, 下雪了啊, then the tone changes from a happy one to a surprised one. It sounds like they are saying, oh, I didn't expect this. It's snowing now, wow. And the same is true for the sentences into C and to D, which respectively convey a kind reminder tone and a softening tone. So the general impression here is that the Chinese style affective particles and affective emojis, they actually sort of serve the same communicative purpose. What's more, they are both sentence final, as we can see clearly here and here. So the question, a natural question we can ask is, if we could propose a unified grammatical analysis for both, say for both the sentence final particles in Chinese and the sentence final emojis, which exist more universally across languages. And I think a null hypothesis based on this portion of data could be that while sentence final emojis or SFEs are the sentence final particles or SFPs of CMC grammar, well, to what extent that null hypothesis is true or false is a different issue, but that's the hypothesis we could easily get from by just looking at these examples. Okay. So based on that, against that background, I have actually three goals in this study. So first of all, I would like to compare the sentence final emojis and sentence final particles in more detail. And second, by doing that comparison, I want to further evaluate the null hypothesis I have just mentioned, which says that sentence final emojis are the sentence final particles of CMC grammar. And then after that, I want to put forward a formal linguistic analysis for the sentence final emojis and see to what extent we can borrow tools from formal linguistics in the analysis of CMC grammar. And to state my key results up front, I have discovered on the one hand that sentence final emojis and sentence final particles actually behave quite differently on closer inspection, despite their surface or superficial similarity. So that's the empirical result of this talk, of this research. And then on a more theoretical front, I also discovered, or I can conclude that formal linguistic tools, or at least a subset of them, can be used to analyze CMC data. So those of us who are from a more theoretical linguistic background can be slightly less worried because our tools are still useful in the area of CMC. All right. So before I go into the details of the comparison, I want to give a bit more background on Chinese sentence final particles. Even though I have been calling them sentence final particle as if they were all the same, they actually have their own detailed internal taxonomy. For example, PAL 2014 listed 3 different types of sentence final particles for Mandarin Chinese. The first type is the tense aspect oriented type. The second type is the sentence typing type. So they type the sentence into a question or an imperative sentence or follow-up question, etc. And the third type of sentence final particle in Mandarin Chinese express attitude or speaker mood. And this is actually the type that we are concerned with here. Interestingly, they are also the outermost particles, grammatical particles in the linguistic structure of Chinese sentences, which I am showing you with this circle-based diagram. So as you can see, this is the core of the sentence. I say it is 11:30. And then this is the position of the type 1 particle. After that, you can add a type 2 particle. Here is a question particle. And at the very end, that's the position for the attitude or type 3 particle, which I'm basically glossing with this surprised or astonished emoji here. Okay, so that's some background information on Chinese sentence final particles. Okay, so this is my main thesis to address the first of my 3 goals, which is that sentence final particles and sentence final emojis do not really belong to the same grammatical category. And I'm gonna, in the next couple of minutes, I'm gonna back up this thesis with 3 reasons altogether. The first reason why I think they do not belong to the same grammatical category is because actually sentence final particles and sentence final emojis can co-occur in the same text message, and they often do so. They often do co-occur. So for example, here are our running examples of it snowing. I'm basically supplying each sentence with sentence final particle in addition with a sentence final emoji, and they work perfectly fine together. And similarly, I have collected some recent real-life examples from Weibo, which, if you remember, is the Chinese equivalent of Twitter. And in all these examples, the netizens are combining in a quite natural way. They're combining the sentence final particle and the sentence final emoji in a quite natural way in order to make the tone of the message maximally clear. So based on these examples, we can see clearly that sentence final particles and sentence final emojis can actually co-occur, which is kind of a mystery if they belong to one and the same grammatical category, because from a linguistic perspective, elements of the same grammatical category are often complementary. So for example, you can say this book or that book, but not this, that book. You can say in the wall, on the wall, but not in on the wall. So that's quite obvious because these are in each of the case, in the ungrammatical situation, we have stacked two items of the same grammatical category. So I think based on this observation, we can deviate from our initial null hypothesis a bit and say instead that while maybe affective sentence final particles and sentence final emojis are semantically similar, but they are syntactically different categories. Again, this situation is common in linguistics. For example, if we look at a sentence in 5a, I have 3 books, here the numeral 3, and the plural number suffix s on the noun. They are semantically quite similar, but they're syntactically different categories. Similarly, in the sentence in 5b, I will be looking forward to reading it. Here, the tense and the aspect are also semantically a bit similar to each other, but again, they are syntactically quite clearly different. Okay, so based on this kind of linguistic consideration, I think that the fact that sentence final particles and sentence final emojis can co-occur is clear evidence that despite their semantic similarity or functional similarity, they do belong to different grammatical or syntactic categories. So that's the first reason. Okay. And the second reason why I think they belong to different grammatical categories is that sentence final particles are a closed class, while sentence final emojis are more like an open class. While different authors could count differently, obviously, but the general consensus in the literature is that there are less than 30 sentence final particles in Mandarin Chinese. And if you only count the most common ones, then the number is even smaller. For example, Leo and Thompson in their classic Chinese textbook or reference grammar from 1981 only lists 6 common sentence final particles for Mandarin Chinese. By comparison, the inventory of sentence final emojis is actually much larger. And in addition, it is actually constantly expanding. So for example, there are new smileys being created and added to the list every year, according to Emojipedia. And also many emojis are implemented differently on different platforms. And some emojis only exist on some platforms, but not on other platforms. And thirdly, there are also many non-smiley emojis, that is emojis that do not really look like the smiley faces, but they can also be used affectively to convey speaker attitudes. And fourthly, we can also see various what I call quasi emojis, including the emoticons and sometimes the special punctuation marks as well. And based on these 4 aspects of evidence, I conclude that actually the inventory of sentence final emoji is an open class. And next, I'm going to go through and illustrate these 4 points one by one. Okay. So first, these are some new smileys that I have found from the website of Emojipedia that have been added in the past 3 to 4 years. Apparently, new batches emojis are going to be released this year or in the next year quite soon as well. So it's quite exciting what would happen in the future. Personally, I find myself using this smiling crying emoji quite a lot recently. And also I'm beginning to use this melting emoji more regularly on a regular basis as well. So I don't know why, maybe you also share my experience. Okay, so that's the first type of new smiley. And then apart from that, I also want to show you some platform specific emojis. So Weibo and WeChat are 2 highly popular social media websites in China, and they both have their platform specific emojis like these ones. And I don't think these actually exist in the more universal emoji dictionary on Emojipedia. Okay, and interestingly, I also found that some of the cross-platform differences actually lead to subtle affective differences as well. So for example, these are the different implementations of the eye rolling emoji on these different platforms. And even though they are all called the eye rolling facial expression, they actually can convey different emotions. And for many users, they are different emojis, which means if we take into account this factor, say the cross-platform variation, then the inventory of emoji is actually even larger than we probably used to think. Okay, and that is normal because I think that's just because that human emotions are really, really complex themselves. I actually did a quick survey and asked around. I asked 6 or 7 people what they thought these emojis, these different eye rolling emojis were meant to convey. And interestingly, they gave me quite detailed and accurate answers because many users were actually using these and alternating between these different eye rolling emojis on a daily basis, especially those users who use both WeChat and QQ and maybe also Weibo. This table contains quite a lot of information, but to facilitate your reading, I have highlighted answers or attitudes of the same kind or the same emotion with the same color. So it is quite clear from the table that people all agree that the Apple version of the eye rolling emoji is a real eye rolling action. Whereas people also kind of agree that the first QQ version of the eye rolling emoji is not really that bad or that negative. It is actually a bit cheeky or even slightly naughty, okay? And these two are animated versions, which probably means they can convey even more subtle emotions. So really my impression from this little survey is that every netizen nowadays is an expert in emoji usage. Well, myself included, and you all are included as well, okay? And then let's move on to the third reflection of the open classness of semifinal emojis or affective emojis. That is, many non-smiley emojis can be used effectively too in practice. So for example, these ones and many others. Here, I will just illustrate this point with a nail polish emoji, which according to Emojipedia is often used to display an air of nonchalance or indifference. So here I have two examples, one from Mandarin, the other from English. So here the Mandarin sentence says, "You don't understand me at all," then nail polish. And the English sentence says, sorry to say, but it's a fact, nail polish. Okay, so the usage is quite similar. It basically conveys a sense of nonchalance or indifference, exactly as Emojipedia says. And last but not least, there are also various quasi-emojis, what I call quasi-emojis, which consist mainly of these two subtypes. The first one is the emoticon subtype. These are actually highly popular and they are really creative in Asia. So here we have this simple sideways smileys, but these are the more complex ones. Interestingly, this one is actually recycled from an ancient Chinese character. It's recycled because it looks like an embarrassed face. So it's used in its visual sense in this way. And also there are some special punctuation marks that are being recycled as tone softening marks in Chinese internet language. I mainly noticed these two. The first one is the tilde, and the second one is the series of three Chinese style periods, like the three circles, circle, circle, circle. They interestingly would soften the tone of the text in two different ways. The tilde is cuter, whereas this circle, circle, circle is more like the tone or the tone in this emoticon. So here I have found three real life examples. So for example, in 7a, someone is asking someone else to buy something for them. If there's no final tilde, the sentence could sound quite rude or impolite. But after the speaker adds the tilde in, it actually sounds quite cute. And the person who is being asked wouldn't feel offended at all. So it basically sounds like the effect of this emoji, this please emoji, all right? And then similarly in 7c, this netizen is telling someone else to get lost, but then they are adding a long series of Chinese style periods like circle, 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 like 6 circles in a row, which quite clearly tells the listener or the other interlocutor that the tone is not really angry, but the speaker is just pretending to be angry. Okay, so these are quite interesting, and all these different quasi emojis clearly tell us that the inventory of semifinal emojis or affective emojis is an open class because new things are being creatively and constantly added in. Okay. And then the third reason, let's move on to the third reason why I think semifinal particles and semifinal emojis belong to different grammatical categories. That is because affective emojis are regularly semifinal across different languages, while the positioning of affective modal particles varies across the different languages. So I have mentioned that semifinal particles in East and Southeast Asian languages are a major type of affective modal particle, but we should also realize that they are not the only type. For example, in German, there are many modal particles which can serve a similar purpose. For example, according to Wikipedia, German modal particles reflect the mood or the attitude of the speaker or the narrator, and they are used also to highlight the sentence's focus. Okay, so here are some examples. we can see a clear difference between Chinese sentence final particles and German modal particles is that in German, these particles show in the middle position of the sentence. They don't show at the end. Okay. But despite that word order variation, when German speakers use emojis effectively, they also tend to put the affective emoji at the end of the entire message. For example, here, I can't follow you too, plus a shrug emoji. So that shows us that the positioning of the affective emoji is not really dependent on the linguistic word order variation across languages. And to further test my guess and to further and try to find things out, I did a small and quick survey of 9 languages on Twitter and the Weibo, which I've chosen languages based on their word order and their morphological type and their family. So I basically chose languages from different types and different families. But what I found was that despite their variation, their massive variation in their basic word orders, the position of their affective emojis is always predominantly sentence final. So here are some examples from my data set. I won't have time to read these out one by one, but it's quite clear that all the sentence final, all the affective emojis are sentence final, okay? And also I noticed something quite interesting when I was doing the survey, because I noticed that many Basque accounts like posting in both Basque and Spanish, but when they switch between the 2 different languages, there's no change in the position of the emoji, which further shows that the positioning of the affective emoji is not really affected by the positioning, by the cross-linguistic word order variation, because we know that as a fact that Spanish and Basque are quite different from each other in their basic word order. So to quickly summarize the observations I made based on my survey so far, I don't think sentence final particles and sentence final emojis belong to the same grammatical category based on 3 reasons. First, sentence final emojis and sentence final particles can and they often do co-occur. Second, sentence final emojis are an open class, whereas sentence final particles are a closed class. And last but not least, the positioning of affective emojis is not really affected by cross-linguistic word order variation, whereas that of affective modal particles is strongly affected by the word order variation, because we have seen that the German modal particles are sentence middle rather than sentence final. Okay. Before I move on to the theoretical part of the talk, which I don't really have much time for, by the way, I want to quickly mention give a word on some cases of sentence initial emojis I have noticed in my survey. So I have mainly summarized the 3 cases of sentence initial emojis, but I don't think they are actually counter evidence, because these cases are not actually the type of emoji that we are concerned with here. So the first type of sentence initial emoji is that which is used to respond to earlier messages. For example, here, someone posted an earlier message and someone else is responding with an laughing out loud. Even though this looks like it's at the beginning of the next sentence, if we look at it more closely, we would realize that it's actually a response to an earlier message. And the second and the third usage of sentence initial emojis are even less likely to be counter evidence, because they're either road signs or bullet lists or decorations. You see, this person is simply putting a message in a nice looking frame, okay? Sorry, do I still have time to go over the theory? Because if not, I will stop here and accept questions. Then if you're interested, you can look into the theoretical part in my upcoming paper. Do I still have time?
You have 1.5 minutes.
Oh, okay. So I will quickly skip over the theory then, and only to tell you a key message that I want to convey. So basically, the theory I'm proposing here is borrowed from theoretical linguistics, where I want to propose a category, a special category E, which stands for emotion, which can categorize anything, any image, any small image or small symbol into an affective use. And importantly, the combination of these 2 would provide an idiomatic emotion, which means that each and every emoji is like a tiny idiom in the CMC lexicon. And then this whole assembled emoji wrapper would wrap around the sentence, the linguistic sentence, which would give us the ultimate a text message in the end, which is a sentence whose content is wrapped in a layer of emotion. And I will quickly jump over these predictions. I actually have quite a few predictions, but I will only have the chance to detail them in my paper, unfortunately. Um, so back to the big picture. So when I was doing this study, I was thinking actually about more on the big picture line. So I was thinking, okay, now that we're in the CMC area, what does that mean for theoretical linguists like myself? Then I thought that maybe we could learn two lessons, or we could have two takeaway messages from the CMC grammar or the study thereof. First is that we can no longer simply assume this kind of more classical model in our linguistic or data analysis. And that is because CMC data is likely to involve multiple cognitive faculties, more than just the language faculty, which means we really need to take the matter of cross-modality into consideration seriously. Second, I also think we need to further tease apart the domain general tools and the more domain-specific ones from the formal linguistic theory, because my personal impression is that many of the very important results in recent years in theoretical linguistics are actually highly domain-specific, which means they can only be applied to analyze, say, human natural language. But we know that CMC data is more complex than that. So to what extent and how many of those tools can be directly extended is a matter for us to further think about. So in a word, I think CMC and the whole area of CMC grammar forces us to think outside the conventional linguistics box. So I hope that's my main takeaway message. Sorry for rushing at the end. Thank you for listening to my talk, and I welcome all questions.
Thank you. Yes, there is a question.
Please.
Hello, this is Rachel Garten.
Hi.
Hi, thank you very much for this talk. I'm actually excited. I was doing some similar research on seeing how to into syntactic tree structure. So I'm really excited to read the critical part of your paper. I'm curious
Thank you.
if you have explored much the scope of modification of emoji, and for example, the nail polish example, it almost
yeah, let's go back to
had like a scope of not just the sentence that it was in, but the almost discourse. And I've seen examples where emojis only modify like an embedded clause in a larger sentence. So have you looked at how the scope of modification could be represented in tree structure?
That's a very good question. Thank you. I was actually beginning to think about that. So in this is like a pilot study here. I'm only considering two big chunks. So the chunk that is what I call the sentence, which is the text, and then the other component is the text accompanying emoji. But I really think your suggestion is very good, because I probably need to further look into the structure, the internal structure of the text itself. Say whether it is a single monolithic sentence or whether it contains more internal structure. Based on what I read, my impression from the literature, from what's in the literature, it sounds as if the emoji mostly only accompanies the immediately preceding full sentence. But I'm not sure to what extent that's true, because, for example, in this sentence, it looks almost like the nail polish emoji, as you correctly pointed out, accompanies the entire text message here. So I think your suggestion is very good. And I wonder if you have any more specific suggestion for me.
I mean, I would love to communicate afterwards so I can email you. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a much less sophisticated question.
Thank you.
I was wondering, two questions really. The first, out of the previous talk about the modality of writing, I was wondering if you are thinking about or taking into account how exactly one accesses the emoji keyboard. Like for me, at least on my phone, I have to click a button and then I have all the emojis, and then it's very easy to just insert 3 or 4 at the end of a sentence. But there might be a practical reason not to insert it in the middle of a sentence that is dictated by the powers that be who are designing our technology. And I know there are certain apps that encourage the use of emojis in the middle of a sentence, like in America, Venmo comes to mind. And I wonder if you would see a different kind of realization in different apps. And the other question, very quickly, is the example, the little survey you'd done asking people to define the emoji, there was a huge semantic range there. And I wonder.
Here, yes.
Kind of astonishing that the variety of reactions that people have.
Yeah, I was shocked as well.
I mean, do you think that it's appropriate to think of emojis as like sort of an international universal language, or are they very, very contextually dependent nationally or linguistically or what have you? Thank you.
Thank you. I think those two are very, very, very good questions for me to think about. Actually, I had a little bit of explanation as regards the cross-cultural or even cross-generational variation in the understanding or intuition on emoji, but I didn't have time really to go into it. So here I'm saying that based on my theory, it actually predicts that there are cross-linguistic or cross-cultural or cross-generational variation in the usage of emoji. For example, I find not only in my survey, but also in my personal experience that many young people think this simple smiley is a highly passive aggressive emoji, whereas some people of the older generation still think it's a normal, friendly symbol. And on the other hand, this pale emoji is used very, very differently in the Chinese speaking world and elsewhere. And that's mainly because in the Chinese speaking world, the Chinese word for pale is homophonous. It sounds the same as the word that expresses, okay, we're doomed. So I think there are actually many cross-cultural and cross-linguistic and cross-generational variations as regards the usage of emoji. I do think that people's intuition on emoji usage, especially when the main theme of the emoji, for example, the eye rolling, is combined further with, for example, the shape of the mouth or the shape of the eyebrow. Based on the combination of all these factors, people can get very different understandings or interpretations of even the same theme of the emoji. So I think, yes, you're absolutely correct. And also, as for the other question, do I still have time to address the first question? So I would just quickly add one sentence. For the first question of why sentence final emojis are actually surfacing as sentence final, I think the possibility you are proposing, say, from a technical perspective, is also highly relevant, because I don't really have a final or quite determinate answer to that question either. I'm only guessing here as part of my prediction that maybe the predominantly sentence final position of the affective emojis is due to our communicative habit of giving the content first before giving the emotion, or even has to do with our typing habit from left to right. But that also means that in a language with, say, a right to left script, then we would see the emojis appearing to the left of sentence. That is indeed the case in Hebrew, as in this example. And I actually also looked into some Mongolian examples, because some people are trying to develop apps to directly input Mongolian script, and they indeed put the emoji at the end in a vertical way. So I think both questions you raised are very, very good, and I would definitely think about it in future research. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And one last question.
Okay, thanks. It's Mark Hüster speaking. I have
Thank you.
one question about the use of non-affective emojis and where they are intuitively, I would expect that they are positioned wherever the word happens to be in the text place, but I wonder if you have a bit more insight into that. And the second, a bit unrelated question is, how are your observations around the use of emojis in a verbose way? So to really replace not the meaning, but the sound in a given language of something.
Okay, thank you very much. So in this talk, I've mainly focused on the affective use of emoji, but I definitely need to pay more attention to the non-affective usage as well, because usually what we see is that the two different usages really mingle with each other in the same text message space. Based on my own Chinese speaking experience, I often see the so-called this sort of rebus usage of non-affective emoji. For example, I gave an example by the end where the pale emoji is used to mean we're doomed, because the pronunciation of the word pale in Chinese, yao wan, sounds like we're doomed. And this is definitely not the only example out there. Here, this ball example is another good one, because in Chinese, the word mao xian sounds like whatever or irregardless of what, which just gives you a nonchalant attitude. So I definitely think that a rebus kind of emoji, or not the rebus subtype of non-affective use of the emoji, is probably a major type in the non-affective emoji world. But for the further details, I'm afraid I have to keep researching and keep looking. But I would definitely note that down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
I see Daniel has a question, but maybe I don't have time, so I will address it afterwards. Can I?
Let us move to the next
Thank you very much.
speaker.